Okay, so we are now halfway-ish through the F1 season and we are in summer break. Thankfully, summer break is almost over because let's be honest, the only people that enjoy it are the drivers and the teams. The rest of us are like, when are you all coming back? So I thought that it'd be fun at this point in the season to take a look at what potentially might be some of the plots and themes that might come up in season 4 of Netflix's Drive to Survive. So if you have not watched Drive to Survive, essentially it is a documentary series on Netflix that follows kind of technically all of the teams and all of the drivers, but in kind of varying levels of screen time depending on firstly how much, I guess, interesting stuff has happened with a team or a driver in a season, but also it's on the team as well whether or not they want to engage. So for example, Ferrari and Mercedes actually didn't get involved with Netflix at all in the first season. So there have now been 3 seasons in total. It has been a huge benefit for Formula 1. It has drawn so many new people to the sport and of all ages, from all backgrounds, locations around the world, and it has been really good. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they've done on the show or kind of every decision that they've made in terms of portraying things that have happened during the season. For example, Romain Grosjean's crash and ensuing fire was, yeah, I mean, it was tough to watch and probably a little bit drawn out. So don't agree with everything on the show, but I do think that overall it is a positive thing. And obviously, given that the viewer numbers are so astronomically high, there is a 4th season coming, which has been kind of in the process of being filmed throughout this season already, so the 2021 season. And with that being said, I have a couple of ideas of what I think may come up. Alright, let's be honest, Lewis and Max's crash at Silverstone is 100% probably going to be an entire episode of Drive to Survive by itself. I think the producers love honing in on rivalries, and without a doubt Max and Lewis is the biggest rivalry this year. And at the time, Lewis obviously received the lion's share of the blame for the crash, primarily because Max went flying into the barrier at 51 Gs, which is extremely dangerous, and his race ultimately, of course, did end there. But honestly, I'm not interested in placing blame on kind of who was at fault or whether there should have been more consequences. I honestly believe that if the roles had been reversed, Max would have done the same thing. I do genuinely believe that, and I think a large part of my belief of that is due to the fact that Lewis and Max are so similar, so similar, and I think that's partly why Lewis actually enjoys the rivalry with Max so much, because I think it reminds him a lot of his younger self and the way he used to drive, and it brings out like that extra level of elbows out mentality, I think, in Lewis's driving. And would Lewis have done what he did against any other driver on that grid? Probably not. There was obviously the question of a 33-point deficit in the Drivers' Championship to be contended with as well, and regardless of how things played out, there was one thing related to the incident that both Mercedes and Red Bull did agree on, which was the fact that all of the racist abuse that Lewis received online afterwards was completely unacceptable, and it really also flagged how much more work there is left to do around racism in Formula 1. Lewis managed to see the silver lining of it in the aftermath, and he actually said that for the first time he felt supported, like he had the full support of everyone in Formula 1 behind him in reaction to the comments that he was subjected to, which is great, but it shouldn't take that kind of incident to get the support that he's been fighting for, particularly last year. And to be honest, the coverage of Lewis's work as part of the Black Lives Matter movement within Formula 1 and more generally, it got an abysmal showing in season 3 of Drive to Survive. It was left literally to the last minute and was given so little airtime, and there was a lot of backlash against Netflix for the way that they handled that. So it will actually be very telling and very interesting to see whether, when they cover the crash and the aftermath, how they actually go about addressing that side of it, or whether they're just going to pretend that it never happened. We shall see. So I think next to the topic of who's going to fill Valtteri Bottas' seat next to Mercedes, the closest or like most consistently discussed topic of this season so far has to be Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren. And you know, we all know Daniel is a fan favourite. He has, you know, particular popularity with Drive to Survive viewers, but also I think everyone would agree that without him the sport would be a lot more boring and a lot less smile filled. And unfortunately, you know, he has really struggled to adapt to the McLaren car, and his struggles have kind of been made all the more glaring by the fact that Lando has been doing so well. So, you know, he's had top 10 finishes at every race except Hungary, and he's also had his 3 third place podiums, and Daniel just hasn't been achieving those kinds of results. It was getting better towards, you know, before the summer break, but for a driver of his caliber, you absolutely would have expected him to ramp up more quickly. With that being said, multiple people from McLaren have come out and said, look, yes, it's taking a long time, but essentially the driving style that Daniel had over the years, whether it was at Red Bull or Renault, has kind of, it's got no relevance apparently to the McLaren car. I know that for those of us that are less technically minded, maybe that's kind of hard to believe that there is that much difference, but they have backed him up and they have said, like, look, he's putting in the work, we're collaborating with him to ensure that he gets back to where he should be, and we know that he has it in him. So I think my curiosity around how Netflix might address this is whether they're going to sort of really lean on the whole Daniel versus Lando rivalry that some people have been sort of promoting, I guess, amongst the F1 fan base. Personally, I don't really believe that things are that bad between the two of them. I think it's a bit of an awkward dynamic, right? Because Daniel is by far the more experienced driver, and yet he has struggled, while Lando has, even though he is the least experienced driver on the team, has been absolutely excelling, which is understandable. He's been on the team for years now. So I will be interested to see if Netflix kind of dig into that really deeply. I think it would be a bit of a stretch if they do, but with that being said, obviously we only see what happens in front of the cameras on the kind of the traditional like TV channels for Formula 1 and the traditional social media channels. So Netflix do get obviously that extra level of kind of insight to the teams and, you know, the behind closed doors sort of access. So who knows? Let's see what they come up with. This one might be a little bit controversial, but we know Netflix loves a little bit of controversy, especially when it comes to Drive to Survive, so I wouldn't be surprised if this was included either. I think maybe the Monaco Grand Prix might be at a bit of a crisis point. So hear me out. I know none of us, you know, either in the kind of fan community nor the drivers themselves and the teams would like to see a race calendar that does not include Monaco. However, it is true that the wider F1 cars have become, the more criticism has built up against the Monaco Grand Prix, and essentially this year in particular, I definitely noticed, even amongst the TV commentators and pundits, and also online, to be honest, as the race weekend was unfolding, it was starting to feel like it was just a procession where the drivers essentially, however you qualified was how you were going to finish, with the exception of, you know, if someone crashes and there's a safety car or something like that. And I think, you know, the TV pundits and commentators would typically, even if that has been the case over the last couple of years, they would typically kind of defend Monaco based on its legacy. And like I say, I don't think any of us want it to be removed from the calendar, but the circuit being as narrow as it is and the cars being as wide as they are just isn't a good match. And there are other street races, for example Baku and Azerbaijan, that okay, the overtaking isn't of a huge volume, but it is definitely still more entertaining than Monaco. And I think the thing that has kept Monaco, you know, so famous and beloved over the years is partly all of the kind of pomp and ceremony, like all the celebrities, the boats, everything like that. And I think the last 2 seasons with COVID and there not being spectators, it has kind of shown up that when you take that side away, the weekend kind of loses its fizz a little bit. And I think it just doesn't offer the same level of entertainment as it used to. And I don't know whether it has reached, like I say, a crisis point where they would be willing to reassess its value, or whether they're like, okay, this circuit has obviously a very famous and historic layout. Is there anything we could do? Is there anything we can tweak that is going to make a difference here? Because I know none of us want to lose Monaco, but let's face it, it is getting a little boring. Okay, so my last prediction is to do with race cancellations. And I think in season 3 of Drive to Survive, even though COVID, you know, almost potentially put an end to Formula 1, thankfully it didn't in the end, but it wasn't really addressed. And I wonder whether it's because the producers were kind of like, okay, everyone knows that COVID is a global thing and everyone knows that it's affected sport hugely in a negative way, so let's just like focus on what was done and what we could achieve, which fair enough, silver lining, totally agree. But I think this year is a little different because, you know, we're in our 2nd season of this now, like races under COVID. There have been some races that have seen the return of spectators, which has been fantastic, but at the same time we've also seen races fall off the calendar, you know, whether it's Singapore, Australia, Japan, that the one that was most recently announced. And in particular with Japan and Australia, I feel like there was a huge sense of loss felt. I think, you know, with Japan in particular, it seems to have hit people pretty hard. Obviously it's a country that has just hosted the Olympics and is going to be hosting the Paralympics, and we've all seen the reports on kind of the negative effects and the sacrifices that the Japanese people have had to make in order for those events to take place, which is obviously a huge trade-off. And they're probably kind of sick of it at this point. They're like, okay, do we really want to bring this on ourselves again for a Grand Prix, especially if they're not even going to be able to enjoy it as fans, as spectators at the race. And I think also there's the Honda point of view, where both themselves and Red Bull expressed that they're obviously really disappointed that with Honda leaving Formula 1 at the end of the season, they're not going to be able to kind of go out on a potential high with their home race. And I think that is definitely a shame, especially given that their partnership really seems to have been kind of blossoming this year. And I think with Australia, everyone just loves the Melbourne Grand Prix. Everyone is, you know, there's always so much excitement about it. Obviously it's normally the first race of the season and it wasn't going to be that this year, but it is just a shame. And I think it's something that kind of has to be addressed at this point, because even for the drivers themselves, it's affecting them. You know, there we have Yuki Tsunoda, who is obviously a Japanese driver. He's missing his home Grand Prix. Daniel Ricciardo, Australian, missing his home Grand Prix. And I think it's something that would be worth addressing, because obviously we see, you know, social media posts from those drivers saying, you know, such a shame I won't get to be at my home Grand Prix. But I'd still be interested in hearing even how the conversations around making the decision to cancel or not play out. That would be interesting for me. Okay, those are all of my predictions for season 4 of Netflix's Drive to Survive based on the season so far. Obviously I haven't been able to cover everything that will potentially come up in the show, and if you have any predictions of your own, please do leave a comment. I would love to see what you think might come up. And I think either way it's definitely going to be a really interesting watch. It always is, you know, even for those of us that watch either every race or almost every race and keep up with everything on social media, we don't have that level of access and we just can't see everything that Netflix sees. So there's always something that comes up that you never even knew had happened, and it's really cool that we do get that kind of that viewpoint into the sport, so hopefully it will continue. With that being said, please do like this video if you enjoyed, and hit subscribe if you want to follow my Formula Woman journey. My next kind of milestone that's coming up is my on-track assessment in Anglesey, which is taking place next month, September. I am very excited about that, so keep an eye on the channel, and I'll be posting away, letting you know what's happening in the run-up to that. Until then, I'll chat to you soon.